Welcome to another episode of the Chris, Rod, Max Show, where every Monday we discuss about the latest developments in the world of AI and what it means for the enterprise, for business adopting all these technologies, and for you as a professional who has to integrate this into your daily workflow. As it is every week, I'm joined by my co-host. Hello, Chris.
Hello, everyone. Really glad to be back.
Fantastic, Chris. And also, of course, Max.
Hello, it's good to be back.
This week, we wanted to look into what's going on in the minds of 4 leaders in the AI space. We look into 4 recent interviews from Apple, DeepMind, Intuit, and UiPath. 2 of them are on the forefront of the technology, developing the models, while the other 2 are rather dealing with the consequences of these technologies. So let us discuss about that. Let us have some context first. On one side, we have that 2024 is a pivotal year in enterprise adoption. These different companies are taking distinct approaches. We have recently seen that Apple just launched Apple Intelligence. On the other side, also Intuit, which is this company around finance and also they own MailChimp and so on, they announced that they are doing their own financial language models, which will be a bit odd for a classic SaaS enterprise. UiPath, very famous for automating workflows at companies, repetitive tasks, is also integrating AI, but it's also heavily affected by the rise of agents and other AI technologies. So as a result, we're seeing different philosophies emerging. Apple is claiming that they are not first, but best. And UiPath is coming up with what they call a Genghis Khan approach. And with this, let's start with our first quote. An interview with Wall Street Journal, Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, said, "We are perfectly fine with not being first. As it turns out, it takes a while to get it really great. It takes a lot of iteration. It takes worrying about every detail." So, Chris, you have been a lot in this innovation space at large organizations. You've seen how for these behemoths, it takes time to get going and move. But what do you make of this statement? Will you say that being first matters or being best is more important? How would you weigh that statement?
Honestly speaking, I think it fits perfectly to Apple, right? Apple was never the first when it comes to PCs. I mean, also MacBooks came on later. I also don't think that Apple aspires to be the mass market device necessarily, right? Apple's pricing is very premium, its positioning is very premium, and I think really what they have been focusing on for the entire time of their company history is really on customer experience and getting that right and getting that good. So for me, I think that is a strategy that works, and it works for Apple simply also because they already have such strong brand equity. They can afford basically to take time to get it right, and they don't necessarily need to be the first to develop some of the groundwork, some of the things that we've spoken about last week, because they're Apple and they obsess over getting it right for the customers. And if we think about all the conversations we had before, I think one of the biggest issues or biggest challenge with AI is really the interface towards the human. So if they find ways to figure that out in a way that is intuitive and easy, such as using an iPad for, let's say, a grandmother or a child, that is really what they're aspiring towards.
Indeed, you're saying, Chris, that, well, because they're Apple, they can afford that. But if we think about everyone else, so now we're seeing how so many SaaS companies, they're starting to feel that their business models, their position in the market is being threatened by the rise of AI first players, by the rise of other entrants who are also adding AI technology into a similar process and so on. So, Max, for you, when you're talking with companies, when you're considering also investing in those companies, how do you advise them to proceed, especially considering that, of course, you have all this feature log of things that you have to implement, but now on top of this, they need to catch up and not only add the latest integration, the latest logging functionality, but also see how they embed AI into their strategy?
So thank you so much for the question. I think the way I would think about it, it really depends on where the business is at from a development perspective. What do I mean by that? So it depends if you're at Series A or Series B. I think at every different stage, your strategy will be slightly different. And if you're an early stage SaaS company, I saw one of the founders fund partners said this, right? If you're a SaaS company and you believe in AGI and you're still developing SaaS, then you must be mad. Because the whole idea is that to have AI to replace a lot of your SaaS capabilities. So that's one way of thinking about it, right? Because the way for you to eventually become mature, it will take you some time. So if you're doing some SaaS, not doing some AI, I think you better have, I guess, a very good reason for it on why that's the case, or maybe it's just too complicated. As an AI, you're just unable to get to that. However, if you're on, I would say, on the other spectrum, where you're already in a lot of the large organizations, you're already in there from a distribution perspective, already in those large corporate. I think taking a more adaptive approach will be super helpful in the sense that because you're already in some of those organizations, you probably have some knowledge on the process flow, on some of the key things that you want to do. And it's just about adapting your current software with AI. We're actually seeing this with a lot of all those larger, I would say, enterprise software companies. They are obviously on the public side, so you can think of your Salesforce, your App Dynamics, etc. But I could see that happening even with the later stages of the SaaS companies. I think ultimately it comes down to where you are as a company and where you are in the market. That's how I would think about it, especially when it comes to like changing roadmap, pivoting, etc. I think it's just a daily life, right? If you're early stage startup. As for more established companies, you're already working with existing companies, so you could leverage that to build on your capabilities.
Indeed, you're bringing this point on, so understand what are your capabilities and also the stage of the company. One statement that Sasan Goodarzi, who is the CEO of Intuit, he was making recently for The Verge, is that Intuit is building financial large language models and they're training it with their own data. So it is really with customer data of Intuit. And he was saying that they're solving what they called this or migration for desktop customers to adopt AI. And here we're seeing a little bit of like two places where we know that Apple is licensing, is integrating OpenAI's technology into their so-called Apple Intelligence. In that, especially for the more complex queries and tasks, they go and then call these services rather than do this internally. Whereas we're seeing something such as Intuit, who is more in the SaaS space, well, developing their own models for their own needs. And this is also possible because costs are coming down. Maybe it's also we're seeing that it's becoming simpler to do this. And Chris, what will you be saying to companies when they're having to decide, okay, now when to adopt this? For example, now they have already assessed in which stage they are, as Max was saying. But now it's the question of, should we, the classic of make or buy, should we go and then buy it from a provider, from any type of vendor, or should we go and do this in-house? Is there anything that makes more sense to do it in the beginning or have like a roadmap for this?
Yeah, I mean, it comes back to your first question around speed, right? And do you want to be first to market? What's the benefit of being first to market? And I think it really depends on the industry and the sector. And in this particular case around, or should you build your own model versus should you license or partner with one of the bigger foundational models, also depends on the use case and also depends on is a service enough and provides enough customer benefit and value that you could also just tap into a, let's say, modified version that you can buy off the shelf, which obviously is a speed advantage. Whereas if you needed to like build a model from scratch, obviously that takes more resources, that takes more time, but it might be more relevant for, let's say, more sensitive data, maybe in the financial space where Max is working in, to build more secure, more proprietary models. When I think of Apple and Apple Intelligence, I think most of the tasks that they are having in scope are very much, consumer tasks that we also probably do with OpenAI on a day-to-day basis, such as summarization or, some notification. So maybe let's say some of these more basic tasks. That way, obviously, it makes a lot of sense to start with a, let's say, off-the-shelf solution and then actually customize and adapt from there. And it wouldn't surprise me if Apple at one point in time would be so strong in their own model that maybe a couple of years down the line, they would also rely completely and solely on their own model.
Chris, have you started playing with the AI features that have started appearing in Apple devices?
Not yet. I want to get my hands on it. How about yourself, Rod?
I must say that I have already started to see certain functionality appearing and so on. And what I like about Apple is how it is a little bit embedded into the application. So you don't really notice, okay, this is
Yeah.
AI that is there. It doesn't say here AI enabled or something. It's just, for example, you want to do so remove like a background or erase something easier, then it is somehow like smarter. Also, for example, the auto-completion is getting better. I saw now that you can combine, for example, languages when you're typing, if you're mixing with like German and
Mm,
English and so on. So things that
mm.
there is some AI behind, but it's not like let's say, like in your face of this is AI.
I think I just want to add to that to Chris's point earlier, which is Apple is extremely good at not being the first, but extremely good at, I would say, user experience. I think a lot of the things that you're mentioning, Rod, about implementing AI at the bank, it just reminds me of all the different things that they have adopted over time, right? Even from mouse to graphical user interfaces, and even now to like the camera stuff. For example, you probably found it somewhere else already, but they're putting into your existing workflow to make it a lot more user friendly. I guess that's probably why we are stuck with Apple.
Definitely.
And
And I want to add to that as well, which is Apple may not be the first, but what Apple does really well is to start and create new categories, right? It started with the iPhone, you have the iPad, then you have the watch. And it's not like there hasn't been like smartwatches out there, but there's a certain appeal to a certain niche of people that are willing to pay lots of money to have an Apple Watch because it's stylish, because I don't know, it's functional, and perhaps because of the brand equity and the signaling to the world. So I think Apple in that case is a disruptor, although or despite the fact that they're not the first in the market.
talking about categories and category creation, likely UiPath, they didn't really create a category. They're the one who popularized the category of all this robot process automation, RPA. But Max, you monitor the public markets. And if we look at a chart of so UiPath for not only the last 5 years, of course, but even within the last year, things do not look that great for them at the moment, even though they are clearly investing in AI, they're in the space. What do you make of that?
I think if you look at that, they obviously went IPO at the peak of 2021. They're one of those COVID bunch. And if you look at the chart, they were at once $80 per share. They're now down to $12 per share. You were looking at the chart. I think number one, just on the market side, a lot of it probably has to do with where the market is at the moment, simply because investors are suddenly realizing that rates are higher, they can't just go crazy and buy stuff. But who knows? This might change when it depends on who come into power in the US. So that's one. Number two, I think on the narrative side, on investing into AI, I think UiPath is on a relatively good position to actually adopt those AI. I think at this point, I have seen quite a few companies that are trying to take away all the different RPA providers in larger organizations. What do I mean by that? It means that a lot of folks that use RPA didn't actually address a lot of the use cases, simply because at some point your path kind of just breaks. But what UiPath has is the knowledge of how those processes work and how it breaks. And if they're able to leverage those knowledge and build AI on top of it, it will be a lot easier. Number one, that's just on the knowledge side. Number two, they're already in large organizations, which means they don't have to sign another crazy MSA to just go through the whole procurement process. So there is something to be said that, adopting some of the, I would say, Apple strategy embedded into your RPA solution, they're already in there, might be very powerful. Number three, I think the team itself, I was just looking at the transcript for the interview of Rollo Bota and the UiPath CEO, Daniel Dines, is that he is trying to push the team to expand and try different ways of using AI. He said himself, right, like they're trying to be a liver like Genghis Khan and just run the amount of AI experiments they can. I think that is well, in general, I feel like it's a good thing because if you have a founder-led company, you can take bold bets like this, right? It just reminds you a little bit like what Zuckerberg does as compared to Apple, for example. So I guess the three things I felt like it will eventually roll into your path's value over time. But at the moment, everyone just thinks that it's a how do I put it? It's a company that is under threat by AI. In fact, I think they're well positioned to leverage AI even better.
That's very true, Max. So, in fact, even to your point, even the UiPath CEO, exactly at this interview with Sequoia on a podcast, he was quote saying, "It's kind of clear to me that if we don't go to combine Gen AI with automation, we'll become extinct, we'll become irrelevant to the enterprises." And Chris, you just have an ear in the enterprise, you just have been at companies where they have many legacy processes, many legacy systems, and where I imagine that RPA is almost like bread and butter for many tasks. What are you hearing or seeing these days in this type of organizations? Do they want to stay with this type of processes because it is already like entrenched and, well, do not change the running system? Or are they maybe hearing this song of the siren of agents and now things will become much more easier and smoother with AI systems?
Rod, honestly speaking, I don't think that the mainstream people know the difference even between AI
Good point, yes.
agents and Gen AI or AI or robotic process automation. It's the same. It's basically people talk about AI. They're interested in AI. They want to know how AI will help their lives, how it makes things easier for them at work. And I think there are many CIOs, organizations that are working on it, trying to figure it out and working with their respective vendor partners, such as Oracle or Microsoft or Google or any of the big ones. But I want to come back to UiPath. And for me, the story is a bit of a different one, to be honest, because I think yes, they're maybe not doing so well right now in the stock market, but honestly speaking, anyone who's IPO'd, as Max pointed out, sometime during COVID, had probably some surprise. I think it's also because they are in a very competitive space. Yeah, so we talk about SaaS software. Now, last time we had the conversation around how new AI startups or entrants are disrupting these startup incumbents, right? Like startups, all of a sudden, these tech companies are incumbents now, right? And it's really a lot of competition. And then last but not least, I think what struck me the most about this particular interview is how fast they actually grew within 2 years. So we talk about this Genghis Khan strategy of, honestly speaking, is it Genghis Khan or is it more like spray and pray? It's very similar, right? Like they basically bought a lot of things. They tried to scale to expand very quickly and try to see how to like combine different organizations together. And I think what they might have done is to underestimate how difficult it is sometimes to actually do the cultural transformation. I mean, just to quote some numbers, right? I mean, they've grown for like 150 employees to 3,000 in 2 years, right? That is a significant jump, not only in terms of employees, but also in terms of culture, organization, identity. And to bring this all together just takes simply more time than the 2 years that they had. So for me, the interpretation is that they've really overstretched and over prioritized growth at all costs without really bringing in the guardrails that you need as an organization that is growing. And I'm sure like if they sort out some of these internal things that will actually make them more focused when it comes to top line, to be more competitive with the very competitive AI SaaS landscape. And then I'm also sure that we will see the stock price rise if they really are able to capture the growing opportunity that we're in right now.
Both of you make good points on, of course, is the timing, and of course, so the market not necessarily might understand if one is AI, one is automation, so what is going on. But seeing now from the perspective of users, Vinod Khosla, who is a very well-known, famous investor, he was also saying, he was being quoted in a recent interview that, so he's very optimistic. Every professional will get an AI intern for the next 10 years. And one teacher can do the job of 5 teachers because 5 AI interns help them. We can imagine that this can be either some UiPath process or some ChatGPT, whatever it is. In the end, for the end user, will not make a difference. Let's think now what's happening today. So, Max, you're in the financial services space. Are you already seeing this acceleration where your colleagues, your peers are doing X times their number of jobs now, maybe not so 5 or 10 times so here their own roles, but maybe 1.5 or maybe 2 because they're integrating AI tools? What are you seeing on the ground at the moment?
I think it depends on which department you go to, but for those who are trying to adopt AI, we're already seeing some significant uplift on I would say on the operation side, time spent, sometimes even happiness, simply because some tasks people just do not want to do. So there is. So, however, I would say it's not enough. We're not there yet. There are a few, I guess, adopters that are starting to do that, trying to do that, I guess, for themselves and their own workflow. I think I mentioned it last time. I am trying to build, like a own market research agent to do some market research for me, so that I don't have to go crawl the web and find information. So they are, like, I would say, slowly popping up in different parts of the organization. And I think it really depends on which organization you go to. Some have spent a lot more money on this, right? The one that comes to mind is last week we talked about JP Morgan. So they do a lot of their legal document via AI, for example. And I would say you're seeing pockets of it, but not enough. We're not, I would say, to the mass adoption yet. Where we're probably just starting to go to the stage before you cross the chasm, in my head, at the very least. It's especially pronounced because you need to set up guardrails in regulated industry on how you use AI. And financial services is one of that, right? You have to explain to regulators, like if you were to build a model, how does the model actually work, right? There's this thing called model risk management in in all of the large financial organizations, which they have to explain specifically how those models work. If one thing we know, it's very hard to explain how deep learning truly works because we don't even understand how brain works. That's just, but people are putting guardrails and I will call it infrastructure together in order to do some of that so they're satisfactory and they can get on with using AI. At least that's what we're seeing. So you could almost infer if those guardrails are in place, there will be a push, from the top, bottom, to push this wider adoption.
Already back in 2016, so when I was rolling out machine learning AI initiatives at large organizations, there was quite some pushback from members of the organization who feared that the roles will be replaced, that they will become no longer needed, they will become irrelevant for the organization. And Chris, you move a lot between geographies and worlds. You spend a lot of time in Europe, also a lot of time in Asia. Are you noticing different cultural differences with embracing AI or maybe being reluctant towards its adoption now that you are between these two worlds coming back and forth?
I think the way this is described as an intern is probably the most accurate description. And honestly speaking, I mean, we've all had interns in our lives before. We were interns in our lives before. How much additional and real value did we do? And normally as an intern or with an intern, you would try to train someone to also become more useful for the organization. And I think this is exactly the right description of an AI at this point in time. And I think it just takes a bit more time for the space to mature and be more valuable. So my quick answer to your question, do we see these replacements? Do we see that, like, from a geographical point of view? My answer would be no. I think right now, and also with an intern, what you replace are tasks, right? You try to replace menial tasks, but it does not justify yet canceling out complete roles, because there's something around doing some quality check to like synthesize this to certain stakeholders, seniors, etc., which is still not where AI is today. And yes, we speak about some of these more advanced and more forward heading companies such as Klarna that are now reducing their 700 customer support people to less than that. But then again, I wanna caution us because we don't understand the context well enough, because maybe those were perhaps yeah, some outsourced resources, and they've decided, okay, we don't need to extend some of these contracts because now person A or person B could take on more things because you have AI trying to do some of the pre-filtering, so you're saving a little bit of time. But it's by no means saying, okay, we're going to like completely run it on AI. And I'm sure this is also something where your quality or your customer service level agreement might actually be jeopardized because AI makes mistakes.
If we stay in with this analogy of AI as an intern, if I think about interns, of course they can solve tasks or they can help us with something, but they also add overhead. They also add some burden in that we need
Exactly.
to manage them. Also, their work is very often not up to standard, so you also still need to spend time on it and so on. And so both you, Chris and Max, you're all the time playing with tools, new things are coming up and so on. Do you find that in the end it really solves a task for you? Do you find that, okay, I can just copy paste whatever it is and then use it? Or do you also see that you still need to spend time iterating it? In the end, maybe it saves you 30%, 40%, maybe 50% of the time, but you still spend a lot of time just getting it to the level that you want. What's your currently, so your so status, your thoughts on that, Max?
Yeah, I think to answer the question, I mean, I was just trying, let's say, for example, if I were to ask ChatGPT something, it would take me a couple of rounds before I get to a satisfactory answer that I was looking for. But even then, I would still spend some time to try to go and verify it myself. Just, for example, I was talking about what ChatGPT is very good at is pulling information together and try to compare it. So I was looking at an investment and just trying to understand for my own personal investment, like, okay, so let's say, I don't know, let's say you pull Airbus up and say that, Airbus versus Boeing versus, China's new plane company, try to understand which one has better mode, and ChatGPT will try to give you some answer. It will provide you, out of the three, maybe one has better mode because of X, Y, and Z. And then you still have to go and verify it yourself. But at least you have a first pass. At least you have some idea on what to look into. So there are tasks like this that you could utilize, I guess, ChatGPT quite efficiently. But I wouldn't say you get 100% accuracy immediately. You still have to do your own study, if you will. And I think it reminds me of what we talked about last week, which is on the this Sequoia's report, specifically around the need to build in, I would say, domain-specific knowledge to your AI models to make it special. So that's something that I can think of, because if you think about like an intern, they're human beings, which means they have a general intelligence with them. Number two, they went to whatever schools, probably trained them to think a certain way, so they have ability to reason, which is the second layer. However, when they come to on-the-job stuff, they will have to learn on the job. So there is some training and learning that needs to go through when you're on the job. So I guess, with models, especially ChatGPT, it's not like I can keep training it to be my own personal financial analyst. So at least not there yet. But it will be great if I can do that. And I mean, in multiple different corporates, I've seen businesses, or should I say it, SMEs are trying to train their agents. A lot of it are still, I would say, a little bit resistant to it, simply because it's like a way to replace their own job. But the way I think about it is, I want to automate as much job of mine as possible, and that way I can chill a while, at least for 6 months, before the company realize that the AI can take over my job. And within the 6 months, I can use AI to find the next job, for example. So I don't know. For me, it's just games are fun at the moment, but it's not. I don't think it's able to entirely replace a person's job yet.
And you, Chris, are you finding that you spend a lot of time just trying to fix the outputs that you get from your AI tools, or you say, hey, this is good enough, I just copy paste and I'm good to go?
Yeah, I mean, I use ChatGPT definitely to formulate things. And in general, writing is something that I find using AI is very strong. It's definitely stronger than how I would phrase stuff sometimes. I also think that summary, it depends. I think it's also a bit of that training that you need to do. Like, what are the key insights of an article you find very interesting? and you need to like lead with example. It's very, the more I think about it, the more it is like an intern, to be honest, because that intern will also just summarize something and you're like, okay, it's not really relevant. And when I think of AI, it's really about these menial, predictable tasks that you need scaling with, right? So again, filing a complaint to someone or like a service or company, and you have like millions of these, having this first layer of attack to get through, filter, and segment in a more dynamic way than you would do with a business logic is already a really helpful step. But again, I think we're still talking about a very intern kind of level, pattern recognition, all these very, let's say, basic things that we would anyways somehow generate with business logic is maybe where Gen AI is now like going one step further. But also, I'm staying optimistic. I mean, I'm sure, like, let's say 3 to 5 years down the line, we'll have our thousandth episode. We're going to talk very differently about AI. And maybe then we also have a fourth expert in the room that's AI generated, an AI avatar. And maybe that avatar will tell us or is an expert in biology. And then we have a conversation about that. I think that would be something that's very highly likely, to be honest.
I really like that idea. I really like that an idea that in a future edition of our podcast, we can have AI guests and then we can engage with them and ask them questions. So that would be really fantastic.
Didn't we talk about character.ai raising like a crazy around, well, what was it, 500 million or something? I mean, we just like get one of those avatars, no? Can do it
Yes,
tomorrow
exactly.
even.
Indeed. So next time we bring over like some character AI, so persona, avatar, so
Albert
to join our
Einstein, huh?
conversation.
Yeah.
Yes. That would be fun. I like that this idea. Yeah. Yeah, but exactly that. So here, even if we stay with the analogy of interns or character AI avatars and so on, and everyone will have 5 of them, or whatever the amount it is. At some point, this is not longer human enhancement, but it can become like human replacement, right? Because if so, you have the work of 5 interns. Well, these 5 interns, maybe this is equivalent to the output of one full-time employee. So if we think about that, Chris, first to you, how will you suggest companies to position themselves, like startups and so on? Should they have the message of we are productivity multipliers, or should I say, hey, we are coming with a new workforce of AI workers and so on? Do you think more like a innovation, revolutionary message of we're establishing a breakthrough, new AI workers resonates better, or is this too terrifying and it's better to say we are just like a better clippy, which will make you smarter and more effective?
Honestly, I believe it's the latter. I mean, reality shows us nobody likes to be replaced. Everyone is risk averse. And I think startups would do a better job in advertising themselves as supporting, enhancing, and helping teams and organizations rather than to replace them. And I just want to remind us of the article that we also discussed around Accenture and NVIDIA now, coming together in a partnership to support AI development in different enterprises. I think that's exactly the kind of play that we will likely to see more over the years to come, which essentially is a digital transformation. It's about improving the existing landscape, the IT, the capabilities that the enterprise can leverage when it comes to providing a better, cost-efficient digital service using AI. I think this is really the reality of how AI will be adopted slowly but surely, maybe first as a license, as we spoke about with Apple, maybe then at one point in time developing their own model, and maybe doing it in a little bit more of an intuitive way that we see with Apple, like, in the background, very much like sort of like running behind the scene rather than like in your face and sort of like completely disrupting the landscape. I also believe, and this is my second point, because I think in one of the articles it was said, okay, AI will replace our teachers and doctors and so forth. There's also a lot of trust we place into human beings, our kind, and it will take time to develop that trust with AI and actually go to an AI doctor and getting a diagnosis of cancer. I mean, I think all of us, if we were to like get that, we would probably verify it 5 times, talk to like 3 doctors, like human doctors, before actually believing in it. And that, I think, is another process that is running in parallel and will just take time.
Absolutely, definitely. When for everything health related and so on, you just want to get multiple opinions. You say, hey, maybe the machine is faulty, the analysis, there was some outlier or something, I need to do it again. This is happening all the time, and it decreases. So maybe this positive message of enhancing and being a productivity enabler resonates maybe better for startups. But Max, on the investor side, are you hearing something on, like, usually how it is with investors is that they find like an investment team and they say, okay, we go all in and so on. So thinking about an investment team around productivity, which pretty much like all SaaS in a sense is a productivity multiplier, right? So that's the whole point. In instead of doing these manual tasks, then somehow this is semi-automated, and that has been the case for now many years. And therefore, this is not as exciting as saying the next big category is human workers being replaced by AI. So here, processes, AI agents, whatnot. What are investors feeling and thinking, and where they're putting their money?
Yeah, I guess there are two questions there. So maybe first one on productivity. I feel like productivity is the goal of economic machine ultimately, right? Ultimately, if you think about productivity, is using less to do more. That's what technology is trying to do. That's what you're investing for. That's why you get the maximized return. Even when you go to economic text, that's what it tells you, right? Productivity is everything. Number one. Number two, I think from an investor perspective, it's ultimately to invest into technology that could do a lot of that. So SaaS software, in general, like code, is to lift a lot of those productivity away, right? So you start off with, people not have to remember everything or write everything down on a paper. I remember distinctly speaking to someone who used to work for an ex-Thomson Reuters, which is a large tech company back then, or just a data provider. They started out very early in life where they do spreadsheet on paper. Like, just imagine your spreadsheet, giant spreadsheet, put it on paper, and they will go cell by cell on paper, draw it out, what needs to change. So imagine that, and then we now transpose it onto Excel. It's probably very hard to see that. Like, that used to be the thing that they do. They would write it on a paper in a large giant cell and calculate it. And that gentleman who told me, I think he used to run a strategy team in one of the software company, and was telling me, yeah, that was what I did at the back of a room. And what happened was software came, and obviously all went to software. And I think there will be a lot of tasks that we're seeing now as us as human beings doing. For example, preparing for transcript, writing up write-ups at the post-production. I think a lot of that will have some productivity gain with AI. I think, even for this podcast, we're already seeing some of that. I think with the investor's point of view, they're definitely seeing some of those gains or betting on those gains at the very least, right? Ultimately, I think while we were talking earlier, one thing that comes to mind is sometimes, we overestimate what a technology can do for us today, but we underestimate what a technology can do for us in the long run. So the intern thing was a good example, right? We kind of like, okay, we thought intern coming can elevate all your problems. It doesn't work like that. But however, if you spend time training your interns 5-6 years down the road, you never know. They could be fastest rising star to alleviate a lot of your troubles, or should I say problems. So I think from an investor perspective, from lifting productivity perspective, definitely, right? That's what technology is trying to do. And I think also reminds me of what Square said, service as a software, where you have 10 trillion of human work that needs to be, or should I say not needs to be, but at least can be automated, and then just free up people to do more of other stuff. So I think Vinod Costa's view of maybe in 30 and 50 years there won't be such thing as work. That certainly sounds super good for me. So I'm hopeful, if you will. So as an investor, I guess that's what you're aiming for, right? You're investing into something that will either entirely replace something or entirely change the way we work.
Yes, you're right. You're right, Max. With that, I also see it so similarly. And I want to get the last minutes of our podcast. Who should be responsible for this innovation? So where should the funding come from? Where Vinod Khosla was also saying that he believes the principal area where national funding universities should go is researchers doing safety research. But at the same time, we also had an article that we pretty much didn't discuss at all. So with the Financial Times and the one of the founders of DeepMind, so the Misa Sabi, who just recently won the Nobel Prize in chemistry for the work done in AlphaGo. So this advanced model that it was able to predict proteins, enabling the development of many so new compounds and potential medicines and therapies and so on and so forth. Chris, you spend a lot of time in Singapore, and Singapore is well known for these national initiatives, for pretty much having these approaches of focusing resources, both human capital, financial capital, into specific initiatives. They are also trying to invest a lot in AI. But at the same time, you also see what's happening in Europe, where, well, sometimes there is some investment, sometimes maybe there is not enough funding and so on. And we see that private companies are doing a lot of innovation in this space. What do you advise to policymakers or maybe even to voters to say, hey, spend more, even if this means higher taxes, then put your money in AI development, safety research, or better say, no, companies, they're the better players for this?
Yeah, I mean, we spoke about that too, right? I mean, I think the US is putting way much funding into different new technologies. I think Singapore does a lot on the government side, but obviously it's a small country. But also just recently, I mean, in Germany, I think that is an ongoing debate. I think just a couple of weeks ago, Lilium was trying to raise 100 million from the government, and basically the state of Bavaria said, okay, we're going to fund 50 million if the state is also going to fund the other 50 million. And granted, Lilium is a sort of like an alum from the Technical University of Munich, so that is the reason why Bavaria was very supportive of it. But this was actually declined, I think, on a federal level. So now obviously it's not really clear if Bavaria will go ahead and fund the whole thing, or if this funding round will actually not happen. And I think Lilium also threatened Germany that they will leave Germany. And I think they're also in talks with France now, and to sort of like develop their technology. And for our listeners, Lilium is a robo or an air taxi, a startup that is transporting people, up 4 to 6 people for a short ranges, and it could also run without a pilot. So that's basically their value proposition. And I think there are critiques on Lilium saying, okay, well, they have been burning cash. It's going to take forever for them to like really have some tangible revenue and profit at one point in time. So that's a little bit the other side. But I thought that was so crazy to hear and see. And I think there was an outcry in the startup community when that actually happened.
That's also like a good point that you're making here. Is not only about so who has the resources, but also, of course, there's always discussions of where should so the money should go to, and will it ever pay so will there ever be a return on investment? But I would just want to close with another quote from Inu Kozla, so who has very interesting things. And for here, I want to get your final thoughts on that, Max, so we can finish our today's show. And it is that he says, I do think in the long term, in 30, 40, 50 years, the need to work will disappear. The majority of jobs in this country, in most parts of the world, are not desirable jobs. What do you make of that, Max?
I guess I concur. It's true, right? If you think about the jobs that you would do and the jobs that you don't do, I mean, not a lot of them are very desirable. Well, at least not to everyone's. Sometimes there are jobs that nobody wants to do, but you just don't have a choice. You just have to do it. So how do I think about that? I think number one, just thinking about jobs, I think is more than just a way to make money. If you think of it as a way to express yourself, like the artists do, or you think of it as a way to give back, I think with that context, I don't think jobs will go away. It's just you will not turn it into a money-making machine, if you will. And if a lot of all those not so desirable jobs are taken away, so more folks can spend on things that are more desirable, whatever they are, I think that will be quite interesting to see. And I guess number two, it will also then fundamentally change a lot of business models and I would say the amount of services that are being provided in the world. And the current population is still ticking up. Across the world, we already see low employment left, right, and center. So the one thing that came to mind was China They have a huge unemployment problem with the younger generation, which is a bit sad. And I think not just there, it's just across the world. It's just China's numbers come to mind. And how do we address that? Because I think work is not just work for you to survive, but also for you to express yourself and to make yourself useful, right? The purpose conversation. So I think the way I would see it, if I were to drive it less from a technology standpoint, more from an individual standpoint, is that if you have a lot of all those menial jobs taken away, you still have to be able to compensate the livability of folks that would have taken up all those non-desirable jobs. And then secondly, we also have to address, I would say, on the mental health side of things, right? You give people certain, I guess, purpose to do. There is a possibility that you could leverage them to do, I don't know, more research, because, research hasn't been extremely well paid in certain niche area, for example, but because of, the ability to support them, they'll be able to do that. I think the third thing I would think about is we are brought up in a capitalistic society. So everything runs on profit, everything runs on money. That's what I believe. If jobs go away, how would that system work? What is it that we will be going after? Today, everyone's going after profit and money, right? Because you're trying to survive, etc. But if that's missing, because a lot of the jobs and value that you're adding to someone is already taken away, how will society function? Right? Maybe by the time the way you would measure success will be different. Maybe it's by impact, by amount of carbon that you're replacing, by amount of people that you help them cross the road. I don't know. But if we were to replace jobs, definitely sounds exciting. I know what I'm going to do, but there will be things that we need to take into consideration as a society.
Definitely. So just talking about job replacements will be a complete episode that we could just talk about that. But with this, we can close today's discussion, where if we see all these companies, all these leaders who are trying different approaches. And I would say the main takeaway is that regardless of if it is an Apple or if it is an Intuit, an UiPath, or you, the listener, it seems all of us are still trying to figure out how do we integrate technologies, what is relevant, what is not, maybe separate the hype from reality and so on. And therefore, remember to like, subscribe, give your comments, share your feedback, and tune in every Monday for another episode of the Chris Rod Max Show. Until next time.